From the very beginning of our 100K10 gathering 6 years ago, we've centered the day. So much of the day is about your learning and your expertise, but we've centered the day on inspiration, a chance to hear from people at the cutting edge of their fields and who are themselves engaging in networked problem solving to move not just their own organizations, but entire enterprise forward. And today we have an incredible opportunity to hear from 3 such leaders and to have that conversation moderated by the I'm not giving away what I'm going to say. We're going to do that in a somewhat unusual format. Pachekachas. Some of you have seen them before. They're like the haiku of PowerPoint. 20 slides, 20 seconds each. The slides move on their own, so if the speakers don't keep up, well, the slides will keep going. And just a beautiful way of getting at some great ideas, and then a conversation between them and Ira and with all of you. Join me in welcoming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's nice. Thank you all for joining us. Come, isn't this a great place? Rah, rah, rah. It is. It's wonderful to have you all here. And rather than me talk, because I will go on forever, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Ed Rogers. Joined NASA in 2003. Now serves as the Chief Knowledge Officer at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And there he has built a set of practices that strategically support the center's mission of designing, developing, and flying saucers. Space missions, sorry. And continuously improving space communications. Let's welcome Ed to the stage. Thank you.
Well, today is my birthday, so I'll sing. Collaboration is funny. It makes a conference room sunny. Makes a partner give money. And me sing this song for you. Well, it all started back in 1920 when my grandparents took a boat to Peking, China, where my grandfather installed the first X-ray machine in China. My mother was born there with a yearning to connect with others. It was about 40 years later that she stepped out when, in August 28, 1963, against much advice, she took her family to Washington, D.C. to hear a man speak. Motivated by her deep faith, my mother left a powerful impression on me as I grew up knowing the significance of her willingness to connect with others that day. She accomplished much more with her actions than she ever imagined. Just 3 years later, our whole family moved to Saudi Arabia, where I grew up living in another different culture. In Saudi, I learned how to ride a camel and how to bargain, but I also learned the simplicity of connecting with other people. We'd sit with Bedouin and sing songs without understanding a single word. I learned we could connect as humans through music. While living in Saudi, I also learned to swim, and that requires, well, learning how to jump in the pool for a pool party or a swim party. Imagine, instead of a party, this organizational knowledge management event. All these balls would be folded flat and stored neatly in a database with no action and no learning. Because learning requires motion, like seminars and brown bags and jars of paint. Jars of paint, no nicely arranged and labeled. But if paint had never been mixed on Paul Cézanne's messy palette, he would never have created this, possibly the first and original selfie in 1875. Well, the paints in my life got mixed up in 1972 when I was sent to boarding school in India for 4 years. Living in India taught me firsthand that my ability to share is not based on how much I have, but how willing I am to share it. A street dweller living under a tarp, much like this one, once offered me food from what he was feeding his entire family, a lesson I never forgot. My turn came in 1982 when newly married my wife and I moved to Lebanon, much like my parents and grandparents had ventured out before. 2 of our daughters were born there amidst the warfare, and yet as we distributed relief supplies and helped reconstruct homes and schools for 5 years, we made our deepest friends for life. If you travel overseas, you know the importance of having the right connectors and plugs. But when people don't connect with others, they actually still work, but they just do their job. I'm sure there are painted over rodents where you work. They are a warning that people are not connected with the greater goal. Usually because they stopped asking questions, probably because no one was listening, because we've been taught to raise our hands when we know the answer. But it may be more important in life to put up our hands when we have a question, like say about O-rings or foam. 2 shuttle disasters for NASA were tough. It's tough because questions can sound like challenges, but they really are invitations to connect. See, I learned this from my granddaughter because she asked questions like, why can't I fly? And she's not really asking a question. She's asking, come connect with me. I'm thinking about flying. What do you think about flying? See, it's a bummer we have to grow up and act like adults. Remember how much fun we had, playing with Lego blocks? Legos are amazing because they teach us to share in bits and pieces and to connect with what others are doing and thinking. Kids are great at this, by the way, just watch them. As adults, we prefer to share complete ideas, something we can be proud of or defend as our own. So while kids are building creative designs, adults are often producing things like dog poo. Here's a perfect example of a complete idea that deflected all corrective input. Somebody actually made this and tried to sell it. Too many well-meaning collaboration efforts end up being a competition of complete ideas, something like a dog poo fest. What we need is a way to integrate our thinking and truly collaborate. We need to see what people are saying. While earning my PhD at Cornell, Joseph Novak opened me up to the wonders of concept maps. If I have to make a visual model in a map of what you're saying, then I actually have to listen to you because you will see my map and be able to tell whether I got what you intended. They help us listen and see what people are saying, such as space exploration, a concept map. But it's a simple way to connect with others and share these ideas more meaningfully. I map everything from lectures, meetings, new proposals, speeches, new business models, and I use maps to teach lessons at NASA and to explain how our KM program works with a very simple model, like this one, that helps people understand that we do pause and learn to reflect, lessons learned for process improvement, case studies for training, and workshops to share our experiences. By modeling my thinking, it creates space and invites others to connect with me, kind of like Legos and paints, bits of knowledge that can recombine into something better. Here's me presenting what I do at NASA by sharing a simple model. It makes people ask, well, how can I be part of that? You see, after all, I want to invite people to think with me, not think for them. These simple practices have helped us create a better learning environment at NASA. We also developed many of our stories into case studies, and we built a case library to support our workshops and training. Case studies are a tool to share simple stories in a way that connects people. All I do is facilitate the conversation. They do all the sharing and learning. This case library is a source of material for our programs, and they're available on the website. Just Google case studies at NASA. Sometimes it's tempting to think that we could do this by ourselves better. The Apollo program got a lot of young people to step out, share quickly and often, connect, build models. But we all know that Neil Armstrong didn't leave that footprint on the moon all by himself. It was, after all, a giant leap for all of mankind. Collaboration is learning. It touches our deep inner yearning, creates a tide that is turning us all to share what we know, what we know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed Rogers. He'll be here all week playing downtown, singing at the bitter end. Who is the second? Is it Karen or Carmen who's up next? Carmen's up next? Next up, right here on our stage, direct from Detroit, is Carmen Medina. She has a lot of, 32 years of experience and service in the intelligence community, including working with the CIA. Carmen is an expert on intelligence analysis. We hope that's not an oxymoron. Strategic thinking, diversity, of thought and innovation and entrepreneurs in the public sector. Welcome, please, Carmen Medina. Thank you.
I spent 32 years at CIA. Here's a picture of me in one of two countries, I won't make you guess, happens to be Afghanistan. And the plane is carefully cropped, the picture, so that you don't see the plane numbers. When I tell people I spent 32 years at CIA, they always assume I always wanted to work at CIA. That's far from the truth. I'm Puerto Rican, and I was the first one in my family to go to university. And it never occurred to me to pursue a career at the CIA, but when I was at Georgetown, the recruiter came along, and that's how I got into CIA. I had traveled my whole life. My father was a sergeant in the Army, and we moved, must have been to like 15 different places by the time I was 12 or so. Here's a picture of my father and my mother. I like this a lot. I think they describe it, they're getting their Puerto Rican on. And it looks like a happy picture, but there was a sad side to it. My father was a very heavy drinker. We had a very volatile home with lots of fights and the police showing up, but the saving grace was my grandmother, and I loved her. She raised us. She didn't speak English except for the bingo numbers, 1 through 75. She had those down pat, and she was just a very wise woman, could barely read and write, only had a first grade education. So anyway, back to the CIA. So I start there in 1978. I'm working on South Africa. I actually moved to work on the Middle East and do something different for 3 years. And then when I come back to South Africa, I'm responsible for analyzing the black political movements. It's the mid-1980s, and apartheid is really coming under pressure. And I am studying this and trying to understand what's going on in the black political communities and in South Africa in general. And when I come back, I realize the dynamic is different from when I had been there. Because now in local communities like Port Elizabeth, small things are happening, like the black community leaders and the white municipal leaders are communicating with each other to try to handle their garbage problem. And I go, this wasn't happening 5 years ago. This is a different dynamic. And my intuition was that this meant that something even more fundamental was changing in the society. But that wasn't the conventional wisdom at the CIA. The conventional wisdom was that the whites held all the power, and I couldn't win the argument. It wasn't until years later, when I read this book, Complexity, that I understood what my intuition was telling me, that change often happens bottom up, that the powerful can be overturned by something that begins at the bottom, and that much of what is significant in our world is emergence. Like this picture I took on a recent trip to China. I didn't plan that picture, but when I saw it, I was just floored by the emergent quality of it. So as I became a more senior leader at the CIA, I began to think less or care less about what's going on in a particular country and care much more about how do we think and how do we come up with good ideas? How do we observe the world? And the more I did that, the more I thought differently from the rest of the agencies. So for example, in the 1990s, and I know, you don't believe that the internet wasn't always here, but when the internet emerged, I was the one that was arguing at the CIA that the internet was for real and it was going to fundamentally change knowledge. Nobody believed me, and if you want to know more about my story, you can read Adam Grant's books, the originals, where he sort of documents my journey as a nonconformist and different thinker at the CIA. So what did I learn about being a different thinker at the CIA? Well, let me share some of my heuristic devices. First, develop a thinking method. I used to ask the analysts at CIA, tell me how you think. And they would say, well, I read and then I write. And I go, no, that can't be right. There's got to be something in the middle that's actually a thinking process, and to a person they could not articulate it. So I began to share my favorite thinking process, and this is the 100Kin framework. Raise your hand if you've ever seen it before. And what I like to do when I have a problem is locate it in this framework. Is it a simple problem, complicated, complex, or chaotic? And that really matters because linear thinking helps you on the right side of the framework and kills you on the left side in the framework. What helps you solve complex and, God forbid, that you have a chaotic problem is serendipity, exploration, experimentation, and emergence. And you know, at least as a first step, locating the kind of issue that I'm dealing with within this space is very important. My second favorite thing to do is have a thinking partner. And it's like a really good thing to have a thinking partner like Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh, who's completely different from you. I'm an optimist by nature, and my favorite thinking partner is a pessimist. Another thing that I think is really important if you want to understand the world as it is becoming is to think on the edge. Read and observe things that are happening at the boundaries. A favorite example, Saudi Arabia recently held a Comic-Con conference. Men and women were mixing there, breaking the rules of the society in costume. And by the way, I think Comic-Con conferences are a great place to go to recruit people interested in STEM. Respect your intuition. My whole story as an analyst was when I paid attention to what my gut was telling me about little things that were going on in South Africa that were very important. And emotions are really important in society, and we have to respect them. And I learned a lot more about this when I was interviewed on Steve Blank's show. And he, toward the end of the interview, he asked me, well, tell me about your family background. Did you have a really smooth childhood? And I said, no. My father was an alcoholic. My parents fought all the time. And he said, aha, I knew it. His experiences and all the entrepreneurs he interviews is that they've had difficult childhoods, and his theory is that because of that difficult childhood, they develop profound emotional intelligence, and that's what makes them original thinkers. So my, late in life, my mission is to help people be more rebellious thinkers, and we even have a book about rebels at work. So my last message to you all, even as you pursue STEM education, is be sure that people understand the importance of emotions. This is Betty Davis, by the way, in a great movie, The Letter. And I actually would advocate that perhaps the E in STEM could also stand for emotions, because after all, emotions is how humans are engineered.
Wow, I'm getting all emotional about that. One of the most, I was just at the, speaking of thinkers, I was just at the DC March for Science last weekend, and one of the great signs I saw was Make America Think Again, which was kind of a nice way you were talking about. Finally, but not of course lastly, is our next speaker is Karen Nelson. Dr. Nelson is an expert in the field of microbiology ecology. If you understand all this stuff, I'm always the dumbest person in the room, so forgive me. Microbial genomics, microbial physiology, and metagenomics. And she has led several genomic and metagenomic efforts and led the first human metagenomic study. Dr. Nelson is the president of the J. Craig Venter Institute and head of the microbiome group at Human Longevity Incorporated. The microbiome is our favorite subject on Science Friday. So very happy to introduce Dr. Nelson.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I was supposed to cover implementation, but I realized that they were just looking for rebels who like to work today, it sounds like. So this is what my typical day has come to look like in the life I live as a scientist and an administrator. I am a Jamaican immigrant. I moved to the United States. I actually went to Cornell and did a PhD there. And while trying to move to Africa to solve all the world's problems, I ended up meeting Craig Venter. And I went there to join him as a postdoc 21 years ago, and currently I'm the president. So I've learned that if you stay anywhere long enough, they put you in charge. For those of you who don't know Craig Venter, he sequenced the human genome, and I am the president of the J. Craig Venter Institute, and my claim to fame is that I sequenced the first human microbiome that was ever sequenced. And this has become my favorite area of interest in terms of the potential that we have learned by having this other superorganism that lives in and on us that we didn't know 10 years ago we had. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how I've been able to implement successful programs in my career. I started out as a scientist. I love the science I did. But along the way, I learned certain keys that could be put in place to having effective collaborations and effective projects put in place. I have managed hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of projects on a global scale in the last 20 to 21 years that I've worked at the Craig Venter Institute. And I've learned over the years that there are certain lessons that have to be, certain things that have to be in place in terms for successful end. This is a simple example of a single project at the J. Craig Venter Institute where we worked with over 110 sites internationally just to monitor how influenza was evolving 2 years ago on a global scale. Imagine having to herd cats like that, people you never meet, where you have to use technology to talk to people on a daily basis. Success in terms of implementing large-scale projects takes various ingredients. And these ingredients are going to be different based on who you are, and I'm sure you guys all have your own ideas of what effective ingredients are, but I'm going to walk you through what I have found to be very effective in terms of my role as a leader. One thing I've learned with people is that most people don't want to be in charge, and most people don't want to take the responsibility when something goes wrong. I love to get the blame, and I love to be told that I was wrong, so I will take it. I put the leadership face in place right away, and that allows us to get to the goals immediately. Scientists in general don't want to be in charge. They want to hide away and just get their work done. But if you give them a goal, you can get to your end product in time. The other thing, in terms of making goals clear, it allows for communication and exchange of ideas. I have learned clearly that the other thing that is important is selecting a good team of individuals. When I look for my team, I'm not looking for the brightest people. I'm looking for people who can collaborate, who work well with others, in addition to being bright. All of you know exceptionally bright people who have huge egos or who are very difficult to work with. That doesn't help you to get to your end point in the long run. I tend to select marathoners. My husband always teases me and tells me I'm a marathoner because I will get a 5-year award and be like, great, I can work on this on a daily basis for 5 years. This is just so awesome. And he's like, who would want to do that? But marathoners are in there for the long run. I have a high level of respect for my countryman Usain Bolt, who can get out there and run like crazy and behave silly and drink all night. But the sprinters they lose enthusiasm if their project doesn't deliver in a short time. So I tend to look for marathoners. If I have sprinters on my team, I give them tasks that have immediate deliverables that they can live with. The other thing I've learned is that there's significant value to diversity. Recruitment from all over the world brings in individuals who have different perspectives of life. They bring different stories to the table, and they really allow you to think and bring different ideas and look at different ways to get to an endpoint to the table. It's very important, in my opinion, to allow foreigners in. I am a foreigner. Thinking outside of the box, individuals who have an open mind, who are able to think creatively about how to deal with changing situations. The current situation, for example, is that NIH budget could be cut. Probably 80% of the money that comes into my organization comes from NIH. We have to be thinking right away on the dime. Where do you go? Do you go to DOD? Do you go to other agencies? Are you flexible with the money that you have coming in? And how can you get additional channels of money coming in to get towards the end goal that you're trying to achieve? Again, so when looking for a team, I would encourage people to look for individuals who are capable to take on different aspects of being flexible, open-minded, and also people who can listen. Early in my career, I was a terrible listener. I was just like, what are you guys talking about? As a scientist, we just want to do our work. I've learned that just by hearing what people have to say can go a really long way. I think almost everybody I've met has a really interesting story. I was so fascinated by the presentation this morning. I mean, it's just like there's so much that you can learn from other individuals. You also learn how to communicate. We're in an era where technology allows you to work with hundreds of people without ever having meeting them in person. And this allows you to learn different ways of communications with different people. One thing I've also noticed is that giving credit where credit is due to people goes a long way in terms of effective collaboration and implementing work to be successful. And just a simple acknowledgement. people just want to know they're appreciated for their contribution, no matter how small it may be. On the administrative side, I have had to pull into something that Carmen was mentioning at end, you know, the emotional side of things. As a scientist, you know, who wants to get all touchy-feely, who wants to deal with people? I've learned that getting in and dealing with conflict right away can go a long way in terms of getting towards your overall goals in terms of a project. And I've had to learn to deal with my emotional side. It was a struggle to pull that out to deal with egos, but most of the people in STEM, if I may say so and not get shot down, have egos, and you have to deal with them on the emotional side to deal with some of those challenges. And trust me, I've met the best of them. In closing, I just want to point out that I've had one of the most fabulous careers. I moved here from Jamaica. I've ended up at the White House. I've spent time with the Precision Medicine Initiative. I've met the Dalai Lama. I've met Desmond Tutu. It's been wonderful, but I still don't know it all. And I'm still learning, and I still take advantage of every opportunity I have to learn from other individuals and learn from the people around me. That's it.